that when we move away from home to go to university, that we hope to become friends with our roommates, or at least that we will be cordial with them. But what I got was 3 years of living with a girl who hated my guts, but then later proceeded to do everything that I did. When I arrived on campus, my family had sort of brought me there later. So it was 3 days into orientation and midday when I arrived on campus. So all of the girls that were a part of those first years of 2023 had already formed their friend groups, and the people that they would group together with during orientation. I had not, because I was late. So they dropped me off and left me to unpack everything by myself, which I did. And that is how I met my roommate. After I was done unpacking everything, she walked into the room to come and get something or another that she needed. And a bit loudly and friendly, I greeted her, like, "Hi, I'm Florian. Nice to meet you." She didn't say anything. She didn't even look at me. She grabbed whatever it was that she wanted and walked out without acknowledging me at all. And as the days of orientation progressed, the HC members of our residence who were in charge of leading us through orientation would tell us in lineup that we need to look for our roommates and see if they were in the lineup. And if they weren't, that we should text them or call them to come down. I would look for her in the crowd of people, and I usually knew that she would be with her friends. She wouldn't even look at me or acknowledge me, and in lineup or wherever it was that we were supposed to be for orientation, she would just pretend like I would not exist. But since I am a fool and it takes longer for me to, I guess, learn my lesson, I would still try and start conversation with her in the room when we got there, usually in the evenings, and she would sort of answer my questions with these one word responses like yes or no. Or she would say something really freaking offensive. Like the one time I told her that I was sort of telling her these stories that I thought were funny from my high school, and she said, "Oh, you're from the ghetto? Um, I cannot relate. I went to private school with white people." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I went to a public school that was not the best, right? Because with me, what you see is what you get." And I wondered for a long time why it was why that she said I went to private school with white people. And it's because I think that in South Africa, a lot of people still associate whiteness with superiority. She would always say these little weird things, like commenting on my hair, for example, that I don't know if it was for the purpose of making me feel bad, but she would say these really skew things that was highly offensive, right? So I eventually got the message and pretended like she did not exist. And that is how we sort of lived. We lived like the other person did not exist, or at least that's how I lived. We didn't greet one another in the mornings when we woke up. Um, we didn't speak at all until about the last 2 months of our first year living together and into our second year. That's when I started noticing things getting weird. So we had different routines because we were studying, or we are studying, two completely different courses. She's studying like law, so she's getting her LLB, and I'm studying education. And so she would wake up a lot earlier than me and also go to bed earlier. But because this is kind of, I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, but I was very depressed in my first year, and I think probably living with that didn't make it easier. But the point that I'm trying to make is I would hardly ever get out of bed. If I did get out of bed, it would be late because I would go to sleep at like 5 a.m. in the morning and wake up at 12 and then start my day from then on. And I would also never get out of my pajamas unless it was that I was going to class. Um, so that was kind of my schedule. She had a bit more of a normal schedule until gradually I started noticing her like adapt my schedule, staying up late at night doing whatever it was that she was doing. I'm assuming it was schoolwork. Um, and waking up a lot later as well. And steadily, I also watched her class attendance decrease because if you are doing what I'm doing, if you are in bed all day, that means you're not going to class either. So most of us are just not attending class. Um, she would also, if I would be in bed all day, like stay in bed, work in bed, get in bed with my laptop and do schoolwork in bed, she would do that as well. And the moment I would get up out of bed to start my day, essentially, she would literally jump out of the bed, grab her stuff, and rush to the shower to get ready. She would also, along with her like her sleeping schedule and all of that changing, she would also eat around the exact same times that I would eat, which meant that she stopped eating breakfast. I assume that she stopped eating breakfast because she was sleeping like I did. Would not eat lunch until I would get up to make something to eat for lunch, and would eat dinner at like 10 p.m. at night, which I thought was weird, but you could still chalk it up to us living together and adopting each other's um, habits. Um, I don't really think that. Um, but yeah, probably if you're living with someone who's like really depressed, you're probably not gonna, I don't know, it's probably not healthy. So, and then the other things that she would do was the food preferences. So I told you earlier that she would say these things that would try and be an attempt, or that would be an attempt to assert her superiority. My food preferences were a classic example of why she would do this. So she would constantly, and I mean constantly and unprovoked, comment on the things that I ate. If I had bread and tomatoes, like toasted bread and tomatoes, she would turn around and look at whatever it was that I was doing in my little corner that I used to make sandwiches and say, I don't eat tomatoes. Like they gross, they gross, I don't eat tomatoes. And I wouldn't ask her because we weren't talking. Or she would say, when I would go and cook and come back with everything that I had cooked and sort of put them in containers and put them away to eat for the next few days, she would watch me then dish up the food and eat it. And as I was eating, I don't eat tin fish. I don't eat that. I don't eat tuna, was one of the other things that she announced to me. I don't eat pap. And the first time that someone else got to witness this was when a friend of mine last year was when her and I were planning to make tripe and pap. And she turned around again from her desk, looked at us. What's that? What's tripe? And I explained basically I explained what tripe was. And She says, I don't eat that, and turns around. Like, why would you do that? That's literally not necessary. And another example of this is one day I'd gone out to cook eggs, and she had a friend in the room with her, and I came back with the boiled egg. I didn't boil the egg in the room. I came in with a boiled egg, and I was taking off the shell and getting ready to eat it. Her friend began opening the windows on her side of the room, and they were like giggling. And she said, or her friend, one of them said, the room smells like amino acids. Okay, what am I supposed to do about that? But despite her going out of her way to make sure that I knew her food preferences, slowly she started to go back on these things. I used to buy really big bags of tomatoes because I go through them very quickly. One day I remember her showing up with tomatoes and eggs and talking on the phone really loudly and being like, oh, like I'm gonna make myself an English breakfast, like the tomato and the eggs, and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that. I thought she didn't eat eggs. And she also began doing this weird thing of asking my friends, not me, my friends, that they should teach her how to make pap, the same thing that she said that she didn't eat. So I slowly watched her go back on all of these food preferences that she had said were beneath her, essentially. And I thought that that was weird. But hold on, if you think that I'm crazy and I am reading way too much into simple little things, I think that we all have an idea of what we sound like. Um, I think, especially if you hate the sound of your own voice. Word stress, the tone at which you speak, the volume at which you speak, the speed, cadence, um, word stress, I think I said that, and accent. We all have a general idea of what we sound like. And before I go on, I'll insert a video here of what people who come from the Western Cape sound like.
No, thank you, Justine. I really appreciate it. You know what? I'm gonna take my mommy to the shop, but I'm not gonna take the main road. Ik ga de ander pad vat, hoor. You know what I mean?
So we are from two opposite sides of the country. So, firstly, our accent and the slang that we use are obviously going to be different. I am from the Northern Cape, from the northern part of the country, and dis hoe ek klink wanneer ek my taal praat. Ek klink baie anders as sy. Die accent is so baie platter. So I sound completely different than she sounds because my accent is a bit more flat. I don't know if that makes sense. But I remember one day laying in bed and listening to her on the phone because she'd be extremely loud on the phone. Um, or not listening, hearing her be on the phone. And it was the weirdest thing because I could literally hear myself. And I never experienced this, so I don't kind of know if that makes sense. But I could literally hear myself in whatever it was that she was saying. Um, Her pronunciation of certain words had changed. And she was putting on this strange accent or doing this really weird thing with her accent that you could almost listen or hear her fight with her accent. I don't know if that makes sense. And I could hear her accent sort of slip in and out. It was so freaking weird. She had started taking on my cadence completely, the way I would stress words, the speed at which I talk, because I tend to speak very fast. Um, and I thought that this was particularly weird. Again, we are not from the same part of the country, so we are going to sound vastly different. She had also begun sort of mimicking a lot of my own body language. I talk with my hands a lot when I'm on the phone, specifically. I tend to flail around or pace the room, And she would start doing this as well, um, which I thought was weird. And it would be sometimes as if she would forget to do it and then remind herself, or she would be reminded, and then slip back into this weird accent of hers, right? So there are a few things that don't kind of fit into the previous categories that I did, like the food preferences or the speech and cadence and the routines. So this is a few other weird things that she would do. She would, I don't know if she was following me around, but there were a few times, 2 times specifically, that I remember that I had to go somewhere with a friend, and she would have gone to bed, showered, and everything, and I would be on the phone with my friend talking about where we had to go. Specifically, this one night we had a social event in my residence, and I was on the phone, and my friends were coming in and out of the room and talking about preparing for it and what we were going to wear and all of that. And she had her earpods in, which I think was a ruse of some kind for her to listen to my conversations, and keep that in mind because that comes back up later. So I eventually got ready, and we go to the Axie and to the social event, and I turn around and I see her with a beer in her hand and this lazily slept together ponytail with her friend. And then, on a separate occasion, right before my final exam that I wrote, I had gone to Debonairs with my friend on the strip of stores that we have close to our um, residence. Again, in bed, earpods in, the whole 9 yards. She was ready for bed essentially. And I'm in Debonairs. We're waiting for my friend's pizza to be ready so that I could get something else to eat at a different establishment. And she walks in to the Debonairs after she had asked my friend, "Oh, where are you guys going?" Relating back to my friend, she would also go out of her way to try and befriend my friends and try to start conversations with them when I wasn't around. Um, or we would be standing in front of the residence and in the middle of a conversation, and she would just barge into the conversation, interrupt the conversation, and start talking about something completely different to my friends, which I thought was strange. She would also get their numbers from the residence group that we had and had saved them to her cell phone, which there's literally no reason for you to do that. Um, Pumpkin also listened to my cell phone conversations, and I had always doubted this because I thought, well, she has her earbuds in, and who would do something, who would do something like that? But one day, the day that confirmed this to me was when I was on the phone with my sister. I'd recently found out that a popular South African actress had passed away. I didn't know that. And she'd passed away about 2 weeks ago, and I just found out. My lips are so dry. So I just found out, and I called my sister, and we had this 5 minute conversation, just like talking about that specifically. Um, so we eventually get off the phone, and she immediately calls her mother, and they're on the phone. And she mentions Crystal Donna Roberts, who had been dead for 2 weeks. And she was like, she just found out that Crystal Donna Roberts had died. and she was in such shock. She had just seen it on her phone, and she was in such shock. Basically, relaying the conversation that I had just had with my sister. Um, yeah. So for the longest time, I felt crazy about what it was that I was experiencing. I thought that I was reading way too much into the situation. So I decided to, before talking to my friends about it, I decided that I would post on Reddit and try and see if a bunch of strangers thought that it was just as weird as I thought it was. I wanted to quickly go through the comments of what everyone said that they think it was. If you have watched the video up until this point, chime in and tell me if you think that I am crazy or what your opinions are. Or you know what? Pause and then type in your comment and come back to this. So someone said, I don't think you're the asshole, but I think you should talk to her about it. She might be really lonely or something and maybe thinks this will bring the two of you closer. Don't get me wrong, it's weird. It would make me uncomfy too, but I can't help feel bad for her. And this was in relation to I'm not going to say what the title of my post was, um, but I don't think that this is the case. She has a few friends, but I can't help myself but think of the first few months that we lived together and how mean and disrespectful she was. And I didn't include those disrespectful remarks in that because I'd only begun to process it quite recently, which is why I'm making this video. So I don't think that's the case. Someone else said she may just be awkward and it came off as frosty in the beginning when she wouldn't really try and engage in conversation. I thought that too, but if you're awkward, you wouldn't be making offensive statements about my hair or the fact that I come from the ghetto and meaning it in a derogatory way. Um, then someone else said, you are the asshole. It's natural for her to start adopting some of your behaviors and slang, especially if she doesn't have other friends here. It doesn't sound like she's being malicious at all. And I get that if you live together with someone, that you are going to adopt their vocabulary or certain parts of their habits or certain habits of theirs, but I don't think that that can happen if you guys are purposefully ignoring one another. Or at least that's the case with me. Most of the time, I would just pretend like she did not exist or that she wasn't in the room. So I don't know how you can adopt my vocabulary if we aren't talking. The only way that that could happen is if you're actually listening to my conversations, which I think she was. Um, so those were all of the comments that I got. Please tell me if I was the asshole and any other comment that you would like to leave. Thank you for watching so much.